You should cut this out, but you're Australian. You have an Australian accent. You sound like a kangaroo. You look like a kangaroo a little bit.
I just mainly wanted to talk about not only your latest piece for us about how Democrats must pick fights with woke activists, but also just a little bit maybe about your history and who you are and things like that, because I actually don't know much about you.
No,
Um, yeah, sorry. I follow you and I love what you tweet, but I feel like you just like forgive me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you really popped off like a few years ago out of I don't know. I didn't know who you were until
yeah, no, I was pretty
maybe last year.
obscure. I mean, nobody knew who I was until I really wasn't public at all until 2021, and I guess that's sort of a long time ago now, or almost 4 years. But maybe that's not that long because some people have been writing for 15, 20 years. So yeah, there's still room for people to learn.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about how you came to be a public commentator.
Sure. So I was an academic. I thought I would be an academic for most of my adult life. So I went to law school. I said, I like I like the intellectual aspects of law. I didn't really want to practice law. You can't become a professor out of law school usually. Usually there's some steps between that graduation and then actually going into academia. So I said, okay, I'll do the direct thing. I'll go get a PhD in political science. I was interested in international relations, and so I went out to UCLA. I spent a few years out there. Eventually, graduated, went did some fellowships around 2020, late 2020. Before that, actually, but I started writing for the public. I started just tweeting, dipping my toes in the water. And then I started Substack when Substack started taking off. People started to knowing what Substack was. This was during the
Were you
pandemic.
anonymous at this stage?
No, no, I was myself.
Okay.
I was myself and I was on Twitter, but I was sort of being a lot more careful than I would be later. I was trying to be like a normal academic, not a normal academic, but like someone acceptable. First essay that really took off is Why is Everything Liberal? This was in spring of 2021, and that's still my most read essay on the Substack. And yeah, I've written more essays. I've published 2 books since that time. And yeah, that's it. I've been doing everything in sort of the public eye ever since.
Is this the trajectory that you thought your life would take?
No, and I feel so lucky because I went into academia, and there's people complain about why academia, is not what they think. They talk about the politics, and they talk about not being able to speak your mind. And I mean, that some of that's true, but for me, the real problem with it was very narrow in the kinds of things. Like the essays that I've written and the essays that have really taken off are broad. I'm not just diving into like one issue. It's like, I did my PhD dissertation on like, foreign policy, public opinion, just like a very narrow topic. And that's like the kind of work you're funneled into in academia. But I want to do like bigger things like, oh, why, just on the international relations front, what are the importance of international norms? Like, what can we say about sort of the role of America in the world and how it matters? And that's just on international relations. Like, I couldn't go off and like write about like political psychology and other stuff too. You can, but like you really need to focus and specialize. That's where you need to put your time. And so that's what I didn't like. And you're not writing for anybody. You're writing for these academics. You're writing these things, and you're just doing citations just to do citations, and doing extra quantitative methods just to do the methods and just to show that you know them. I enjoy much more just going out there and being able to write what I want. And it's not many people get to do this. I go to the Substack app, and I see people who are they get like one comment for their article, and I'm just like, when I see somebody who's really good and who's sort of obscure, I try to encourage them, because like I know it's a labor of love. I know a lot of people want to write for the world, and very few can do it as a full-time job, especially as independent as I am, especially someone who really doesn't write for mainstream publication or any publications. I wrote for Quillette recently, so I'll write like an article outside my
If we're
Substack
classed as mainstream,
yeah, I
probably
mean,
not.
when I was like like twice a year or 3 times a year, I'll write something, because just for whatever reason. When I was starting out, I needed to publish op-eds just to sort of get my name out there. But I don't even need that. I don't have any editorial line. I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. And yeah, I had no right to expect this. It's pretty cool.
It seems like you've thought about it in quite a professional way in terms of how to get your name out there, promotion, things like that. Do you do a lot of marketing? Because I've seen some of your tweets and I'm like, I wonder if this is for engagement or if it's legit.
I mean, you have to try to get attention. Sometimes people think I'm like lying about my views or like something like that. I never do that. But yeah, I mean, I'll like post pictures of, I once wanted to say
Chicks,
there's
boobs,
only a
Sydney
couple ways.
Sweeney.
Boobs, yes. Okay, there's only a couple ways to get famous on Twitter now, right? To get big, fake news, just completely make up nonsense, or you can just be a partisan, just tell everyone what they want to hear on one side or the other, or you can post thirst traps, you could post about women's bodies, and I think that is the most dignified and most honest way to
Thank
get a
you.
Twitter
That means a
following.
lot to me.
Yes,
No,
I think
my
that's
thirst traps haven't done that well lately. I don't know what it is.
your
I
thirst
don't
traps. Oh
know
well,
if
you
it's
should. Okay, I haven't come across them. They've got a. I
oh, that's
mean,
good. See, that's a sign that they haven't done that
the
well.
algorithm's not pumping them. Maybe I can
Mm,
help. I was just on a podcast. They were asking me to rate thirst traps. So yeah,
wow.
I guess I've developed an expertise in that.
Sounds like a fun podcast. Uh, and how would you describe your political views in general, and have they changed much over time?
Pretty much libertarian on most things. I think individual liberty is important. I think it's the best way to, from a utilitarian perspective, to maximize human well-being. And even when it's not, I still favor it just as a matter of human dignity. Like I don't believe in paternalism. And that, I've been a libertarian, in some form or another, pretty much as long as I've been thinking about politics, except when I was like really, really young. And I've changed a bit on like American foreign policy. People could see I took the sort of standard libertarian line for a lot of years. That started to change around 2022. And I used to be a little bit more sympathetic towards conservatism, like sympathetic towards social conservatism, sympathetic towards immigration restriction. I've really become disillusioned with all that. I think it's just I just think goes in a bad direction and can't be justified. And so, yeah, I mean, I've
What
always been
direction?
pretty
What
much.
bad direction do you mean?
I mean, I think the social conservatism, like I have a kind of social conservatism, which is not the kind that appeals to most people. No, I think, I'm a pronatalist and I think most men are happy being men and most women are happy being women. But like most social conservatives are focused on fetuses and, they're not, interfering with people's personal lives. And a lot of them are really actually hostile and misogynistic towards women.
Homophobic.
I have nothing, in common with these people. And just to sort of, find myself in the same, just to be sympathetic towards them for vibes based reasons. And I, seeing I've written about the Canadian euthanasia thing. Like, I just think it's like the most disgusting thing possible to want to tell people that they can't end their own lives. Like that to me is like the number one right. Like it's more important
Hmm.
than free speech. It's more important than gun rights. Like I don't want to live. Like right to
Yeah.
life. Like I have a right to death. And
You
just
sound
seeing
like me, maybe in that, like, inherently personality wise, you're just not that conservative. You're too far and too high in
yes,
openness
yes,
or something like that.
yes. My
Yeah.
conservatism was always a kind of like anti-egalitarian sort of freedom thing.
Mm.
And then sometimes I see conservatives attacking liberals from the left on abortion. Oh, you want to you want to. Oh, there's abortion for handicapped children. Oh no, we can't have that. Oh, euthanasia. You're gonna do eugenics, right? So surrogacy. Oh no, we have rich people having kids. Sometimes you'll hear them saying that, exploiting poorer women. And like I just consistently hate that stuff. I just deeply hate taking the idea of taking away people's liberty for some egalitarian purpose. And the right does it and the left does it. And even people who are
Well, the
like
right
me,
does it because they get the ick, right? A
they
lot
get
of the
the
time.
ick, or they're very commonly, yeah, they get the ick. They're religious. It's a coalition, and like I find that even people who agree with me on the substance of these issues will not want to challenge. They'll really want to downplay. They'll have the same instincts I do, but they'll downplay the extent to which those instincts are at play. They're all like, no, all the left wing people are the people who are just these radicals who want to tear everyone else down, and like yeah, a lot of left wing people are that, but maybe that's like I don't know, 40% of the left and like 25% of the right or something, right? There's a lot of it on both sides. And I think very few people are able to sort of handle that. Like whatever they hate, if you have a consistent hatred of something that like you turn away from and you say, this is sort of my enemy as far as politics and moral values, it's very unlikely that you're going to find that entire instinct on one side of the political spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. And it reminds me of something I was just saying, browsing on Twitter this morning, that Trudeau has come out and has been like, yeah, we need to cut down immigration, which is huge. For him to say that, I think that's it's a big deal. But when you look at the feedback, people just hate him so much that even the people who have been asking for this for years are just angry that he's now doing what they've wanted for a long time simply because they hate him. And, I'm not Canadian. I haven't experienced what it's been like living under him. But I'm sort of like, shouldn't we celebrate the positives, the wins, even if it comes from someone you hate?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think people are just sort of looking for something. They're looking for a club to belong to. Oh, they're looking for an enemy, and we're the conservatives. We tell ourselves a story that we're the normal people, the people who are healthy and are not vexed, and not on seed
Seed
oils.
oils.
We're the good looking people. I mean, like it's like not even connected to reality. I was talking the other day to somebody about how Americans conservatives are the fat ones, and liberals have this old thing where it's like, oh, we're the ones who care and are educated and so forth. And people just they love that feeling. If you're into this for the ideas, if you're into this for some vision of humanity, and you don't need that, then like you're just not gonna identify with these people who are you're just gonna see this tribalism, and it's gonna make you. If you're a real individualist, it's just gonna make you sick.
Mm-hmm. But you have experienced that to some extent, haven't you? Because you felt, I've read, your journey out of extremism. So what changed, and why do you no longer feel such a desire to be part of a group?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I was always sort of, right wing for probably reasons that are, sort of similar to what I am today. Like I saw the left as these kind of people, like the way that many right wingers do today, as like people who just want to destroy everything and are
Mm-hmm.
anti-white and anti-male and anti-success. And I still believe that to some extent. And I thought that like the way you fight that, or the alternative to that, is to go far in the other direction and
Mm,
ally with the racists, the people who are actually racist,
mm-hmm.
and the sexist, and have these, and like just sort of accept the inevitability of human nature and tribal conflict, and say, I'm going to go on this side.
But that wasn't really you. You just felt a need to align with them.
I mean, it wasn't really me. I mean, it was me in that, like, I believed that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I believed, I believed that sort of a kind of identity politics for the right, I thought was correct. So I did believe that, not in the same way that I think a lot of people did. It was, more of like, this is how you fight the left, that I think a lot of people
Mm.
for who being a rightoid and having this identity was sort of their vision. But yeah, I mean, I saw it sort of as not. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And only if you're comfortable talking about it. I mean, you've written about it, but how can you would you well, I think you do say you had objectively racist beliefs, or you expressed those. Is that right?
I mean, yeah, I did. By some definitions, depends on your definition. I mean, I still have racist beliefs by some people's definitions. It's a sort of a hard word to pin down.
That's true. That's very true. I'm obviously sympathetic, and we're on the same page when it comes to your frustrations about the left not being able to talk about group differences. And then that frustration you took, and it made you just want to fully lean into the right.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of these things that these people who thought, there was a lot of political, there's always been a lot of political correctness on the left. And you can really overcorrect for that. Like I see people who think that there's like a difference between group differences and like believing that, and this is what a lot of right wing people like, oh my God, if America becomes 10% more, 10 percentage points more Hispanic in like 30 years. And that's what the immigration
Mm.
debate is about. Like we're going to
Hmm.
shut off immigration and like 30 years we'll be 5% more white. We'll be 57% white in America instead of 48.2. And oh my God, that's all I need to know about the future of the country. That's how these people think, right? That is just taking it too far. It's ridiculous. And they sort of with the rise of the Trump movement, you see that like, they're like not that different from like these leftist identity politics, and like they'll apologize for the worst possible behavior among their group, right? So the Trump movement, like this guy is objectively horrible. Imagine if a Hispanic leader with the support of Hispanics in America tried to overthrow the election in 2020. They would take this as proof that brown people, that people from Latin America, just have no capability for democracy, right? But it was them. It was them. It was these white, tri- white tribal people on the right who tried to do that. So like it's the ideas. It's not about like one group has a slightly higher average whatever than the other group. It's like the ideas are what's important, and that's what's worth fighting for.
I guess the difference is, yeah, some people use those group differences to justify, um, yeah, hierarchies or believing that one race or one sex is better than another. For example, I often talk about sex differences. Because for me, learning about sex differences was very liberating because I realized that, oh, I'm not exactly the same as men. And it actually made me more sympathetic to women and to men. And I think, if we understand that on average, women are a bit higher in agreeableness, maybe we need to help them to, negotiate higher salaries or things like that. It's actually quite a left wing. I'm coming at it from a very sympathetic angle, whereas people hear me talking about it and think, oh, so you think women are less than men? And.
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, with male and female difference, it's interesting because you could say men are inferior in some ways because they're more violent and so forth. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, there's like a case there. I mean, there is like, it is actually a more difficult question about like, if one group is actually smarter than the other, and the male female differences in IQ are small or non-existent. I mean, they're small enough that they're not like, but if the averages between groups is larger, I think people sort of have trouble with that. I don't think it's something we should be talking about all the time in society. I actually wrote an article called "Shut Up About Race and IQ," and I think find that most people who are obsessed with this become like very, very kind of tunnel vision, and they start caring about having the right demographics, and they sort of not they care less about ideas, and they're not open to reason about like a lot of the people who convinced me on the immigration issue in particular were people like Brian Kaplan, people like my friend Alex Narasta. I mean, people who like weren't delusional about group differences at all, but said, look, there's a division of labor thing. Other people are not necessarily burdens unless government policy makes them a burden, and I think we should fight for that nobody's a burden, whether they're foreign born or native born. And so yeah, I mean, there's ideas, and there's like truth, and then there's like what you do with it, and there's like also like what you acknowledge, but also what you stress, like what you stress in your worldview. And
Your
people who
focuses,
stress
yeah.
like IQ, race differences at IQ, their worldview is limited at best and sort of deranged at worst. Oh, where did
Yeah.
where did Zoe go?
Excuse me, I'm here. It's just so hot. I'm in an attic and I had to lift up the window. Um yeah, some people become very focused on yeah, topics like race. At the same time, you could argue that it's sort of part of, you know, the climate we live in that if you have a grift or a niche that you can really, really hone in on, that's how you make money, right? Just writing about this. Or, I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. There are people who write about lots of topics, but
Yeah, I mean it's a niche. Yeah, I mean especially on since Elon Musk bought Twitter, there's people who just post about race all day, and they different levels of sophistication. Some of them use real stats, and some of them are just deranged lunatics. But yeah, the market for racism. I mean, it's It's huge. We found out with Elon Musk. I mean, it was really suppressed before, but we really found out people do love this stuff. It never went out of style. It was just suppressed all these years.
Would you class yourself as mainstream and your views as mainstream?
I have an article called "Don't Call Me Heterodox" because I don't like this idea. Like, there's this thing called heterocon. It's
Mm-hmm.
people kept asking me whether I got invited
Hereticon,
to.
right?
Yeah,
So I
whatever.
just
However
went
you
to
say
it
it.
in
And
Miami. Yeah.
I hate this labeling. It's like because
Mm-hmm.
people who label themselves like this, they just take, they just believe in every not, non-mainstream sort of quack
Mm,
crazy theory out there. And it's like I'm not a hetero. I have views that like, whatever the New York Times doesn't like, and I have views that like the New York Times is correct and their opponents are completely wrong, right? So once you say, I'm heterodox, it becomes an identity. It doesn't really tell you anything about the substance of their beliefs. So yeah, I mean, I go on. I mean, academics talk to me. I go on shows. I've been in I've been in Washington Post, New York Times. I get cited there still. So yeah, I mean, I believe in engagement, and I don't believe in this sort of like cloistering your ghettoizing yourself, or even doing that mentally. Like I'm this guy who's different, and like everyone is like no, it's all give and take. It's all we're all part of a community. We're all sort of this is very sort of sounds like a hippie or something, but it's true. It's dialectic. It's we're always in conversation. And I think that's a healthy way to be.
yeah, I agree. Is there anyone whose hand you wouldn't shake?
I mean, if they wash themselves, if they had good hygiene, I would want. I don't know, like
I was talking to my fiance about this because I was thinking, would I shake Putin's hand? And we talked about how it would be different if in person, in a pub, you might not shake their hand, but publicly, if you want to make that statement, you would shake their hand.
I mean, it depends on what. Am I going to negotiate with Putin on? I mean, for something that I guess I would have to. They do have this thing in American foreign policy where like they never talk to leaders. Like it's like Trump was like the first president to talk to a leader of North Korea ever. Like so as long as there's been a North Korea, and it's like, I mean, not talking to North Korea, not shaking their hand or whatever hasn't worked. It
Exactly.
hasn't worked. So like, yeah, I mean, I think probably even talking to dictators, like I'm not against it. I don't think like everyone is worth talking to, right? Like if it's like I don't think like everyone's. I mean, you see it on Twitter. I mean, if I talk to everyone on Twitter who was responding to my posts or my articles or whatever, I mean, I would have nothing else to do because it's just endless amount of people. And none of them are just stupid. You just be explaining very simple concepts to them. They're not even informed or whatever. And some people are, hateful and sort of not good faith actors and so forth. But like, not shake. If someone tries to shake my hand, I'd probably shake it without thinking too much about it. Well, what would I accomplish by not doing it?
Hmm. So are you feeling pretty optimistic about the election, the Trump win, or how are you feeling? And what's the vibe in the States? I'm not sure where you are. Where do you live? What
I live
state are
in
you in?
Southern California, and yeah, I just had lunch with Claire and her husband a few days ago.
Yeah, she told me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and yeah, I
nice.
mean, it's I was sort of happy Trump won, but sort of had a sense of foreboding at the same time. And then there is a video, that live stream that I did on the night. I was with Destiny and some of his friends, and that's a live streamer for people who don't know, people who are older. And I was like, we were talking about what a Trump, it looked like Trump was going to win, and I'm like, if he points RFK, like, that would be like, I would know I was wrong. Or something like that. I would regret it. And then he goes and he points RFK and he points Gabbard. And now I have a sense of foreboding that he's actually, crazier. I thought it would be a little bit more like the first administration where he appointed a lot of normal Republican types. But no, the RFK thing is disturbing. The Gates thing is pretty disturbing. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the Democrats are having some healthy conversations, and I think Republicans are, devolving more and more into like the cult of personality. Like it becomes more stronger and stronger over time. The last 8 9 years. Yeah, I mean, there's things about American society that are there are reasons to be optimistic. I think there's like a lot of things that are becoming a kind of bipartisan causes that are like sort of beyond this stupidity of the surface level politics. Like Congress passed some nuclear power reform bill the other year. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it how it affects things. There's been a movement on housing. There's been a lot of pro building legislation that's passed in the states. It's a lot of this stuff is happening under the radar. And it's like the main event, the show, like continues to be sort of crazy and entertaining. So yeah, I mean, there's trends going in the back both directions. I do wonder. I'm getting more and more worried about how much the Republican Party is broken. I mean, Democrats have issues, obviously, and I'm not a Democrat, and they have crazy people, but they have like a kind of, again, that word dialectic. They have like these discussions about like what we should be doing and like what should we stand for and like policy informed debates. And then Republicans just don't. They just live in they live in sort of a fantasy world. Like right wing media is just I mean, it's just trash. I mean, Twitter has become just a cesspool of misinformation, just nonstop thrown in your face. And like they all, it's conventional. I saw a Republican senator today, just talking about how vaccines maybe cause autism. Like I thought this stuff would be sort of siloed, maybe a little left, but no, every one of these this sort of what I call gribbleism, like these RFK types who were
What do you call
once,
it? Gribbleism?
yeah. So have you ever seen King of the Hill? As a young Australian, you may not have. It's a great show.
No. I've
Okay, I
heard of
should
it.
write a book.
Oh, yeah, yeah, the cartoon.
Yes, it's a
Yeah,
great show.
the adult. Yeah, yeah, Gribble.
It's a very right wing show. It was on in the 1990s to the early 2000s, and there's a character
Yeah,
called Dale
I've
Gribble
seen it.
who's just
Yeah,
doesn't who has like his ideology is
the
just
redneck
conspiracy.
neighbor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
his ideology is just conspiracy theories.
Hmm.
And I think that's the way to like understand RFK. Like he believes like in corporation conspiracies and medicine and these other things. I think that's the way to understand them. And they've sort of become, and these people were sort of not so empowered before Trump. They didn't feel like a guy represented them. Trump is not as conspiratorial as them, but just like the fact that he's like, he's just got sort of the attitude that appeals to them. And the fact that they're all concentrated in the Republican Party, which is going to win half the time, it's it's bad. And him being head of HHS is bad. I mean, he, best case scenario, like there's other people who sort of run circles around him, and there's actually good people who are up for jobs in the Trump administration on specifically on health issues. But the other possibility is that like RFK like has a list of people he brings along, and the Republican Party just becomes infected with this stuff. And in that case, who knows? I think we could have a very bad outcome. Maybe they just become a permanent minority party, and maybe the Democrats get better, but maybe the Democrats don't get all that much better, and that's that would be a bad outcome.
Do you think they've started doing what you suggested they do, which is picking fights with woke activists? Have we seen much of that happening?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that you can see anything in the last 2 weeks, there is like you know nothing is it's not as bad as 2020 and 2021. And the test will be, as I wrote for Quillette, the test is going to be: do they actually back this up with policy? They actually do this. I should have mentioned maybe more than a lot of people think. I mean, they do sort of run against. There was this compilation put together of senators running in purple and red states, Democrats, and they were talking about they don't favor trans and women's sports and all that. But it's sort of really superficial. At the end of the day, they pretty much every Democrat judge that's appointed supports like affirmative action. Every Democrat who has executive power ends up at least being very tolerant or lenient towards like woke activists in universities and in the education system and so forth. So even if they're not actively like pushing this left wing culture war stuff, they at least let it happen, and people sense that Democrats are the party of these people. And there's also, there's an economic debate on the left. I mean, there is sort of this, this kind of socialist wing. It doesn't seem to be on the upswing. I mean, it does seem like more centrist, sort of pro market people. I like seeing Democrats push back on Trump's tariff ideas. And so, they are getting sort of, I think they're getting better on economics. I was hoping Kamala would stand up to the longshoremen union who are trying to shut down the ports. I mean, these are the worst people in politics because their whole thing is like, we just have to stop automation, right? So the longshoremen on the East Coast were
These
saying,
unions.
exactly. Yeah. And somebody actually told, I wrote about it at the time. Someone said, if Kamala comes out against a longshoreman, would you vote for her? And I said, maybe. Like that would be like a test that they're standing up to this terrible, terrible interest group. But of course she didn't. Kamala Harris and Biden both, stood with the unions. Yeah. I mean, that's, but like smart liberals, like you read them and they sort of saw how crazy this was. But in the end, my fear about the Democrats is in the end, when a push comes to shove, they're going to get rolled by their interest groups. Somebody will make a comment every now and then, like, oh, this goes too far, this or that. But you really need like a strong leader, and you need like constant pressure. You need pressure pushing back in the other direction to stand up against these forces. And I don't see much evidence of that in most places. There's some good governors, there's some good individual congressmen. It's far from the norm within the party, but we'll see. I mean, it needs to be a self-conscious, because they talk about. I don't think trans and women in sports is the biggest issue in the world, but just using it as an example, this congressman comes out, Seth Moulton, and says, I don't want my young girls, being run over by a former male athlete. And then like all these people, write, open letters against him, and they criticize him and so forth. And like, look, these trans activists are still going to be there pushing their agenda. And the question is like, is Seth Moulton just going to say this one thing and then move on? Or is someone going to run, like a presidential campaign, for example, really focused on sort of marginalizing these people? It works like this for every issue. And that's what's yet to be determined.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of the Palestinian-Israel conflict, which I want to talk about as well. And the issue with the left here, and I think in many Western nations, is that they're not pushing back enough against like radical Islamism, and saying you can advocate for the Palestinian cause and you can criticize Israel and all those things are fine without actually siding with legit Islamists.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. There are people, I've read a bit on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are people who sympathize with Islamists. I don't think that's like the most dangerous thing necessarily. I think what's actually more dangerous and more mainstream is this naivete about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's the well-meaning people like in the Biden administration who don't want Hamas to win or anything, but like also are uncomfortable with Israel actually winning. Like want to hold sort of handcuff them and not let them fight in the way that needs to fight for to achieve victory in the war. And so, yeah, I mean, there are like people who are sympathetic towards Islamism. They're nice to dunk on. They don't have a lot of power, but I think it becomes de facto sympathy for Islamism when you basically say, "Oh, they can hide behind civilians, and there's nothing we can do about it. Therefore, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian government, they get to stay in power forever." That creates a very unhealthy dynamic.
Are you Palestinian?
And my dad is a Palestinian, and my mom is Jordanian.
That's so interesting. Have you always been sympathetic towards Israel?
Not really. I used to be more sort of just anti-war as a general matter. I mean, I was more sort of anti-interventionist American foreign policy, and I sort of blamed, like a lot of people who are anti-interventionist, blamed Israel for U.S. involvement in the Middle East, not in a conspiratorial way, but just like because the U.S. was so pro-Israel. And but over time, I mean, I just sort of understood that like like history happens, like I think the October 7th and like the Russia invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It's like, yeah, there's people who will like invade and like kill their neighbors like if they can. And like I don't see any evidence that like the Palestinians in Gaza in particular are capable of peace. I mean, I wrote an article I think called "Why Palestine Can't Deliver Peace," and the idea is like, you don't know, like this, the way this works is like, even if like the majority of people don't support Hamas, like even if a minority does, even if there's a minority movement, if you're not going to go kill them and like kill anyone who aspires to do what they do, those people are going to control they're going to control that society. And so yeah, I mean, I think Israel is a civilization worth defending. I mean, I think they have they have a first world country, they have the only one with a healthy birth rate. I mean, that's something that's worth preserving. And like, what do the Palestinians have? Like, oh, they're just like, they were treated poorly in the past. Like, okay, but like, they're the authors of their own misfortune. And, there's nothing good of just letting them nurse this fantasy that they're going to destroy Israel, which could actually become a reality. I mean, if Israel behaved as people on the left want them to behave, there's nothing good about letting them, hold on to this hope forever. And so, yeah, that's the way.
Well, they're just being used, aren't they, by Iran, essentially. Iran just uses the Palestinian cause to get its way. I think it is a genuine cause, and it, historically it's its own cause, but over the last few decades, it's just been used by Iran to get its way, and the left just falls into it without even realizing that, like idiots, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Palestinians have been a problem. I mean, in the Middle East, I mean, I think for longer than Iran, has been under the revolutionary regime. So it's, yeah, it's general in the region, and you just have to sort of, you
Is it
have to
just
take,
Islam?
it's, like, I don't know, the UAE is Muslim and
Yeah,
they're
true.
doing great things. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously part of it. It's the religious claim, and it's the fact that they're Jews, and the fact that it's Holy Land makes it so such a sort of a situation that's like so emotionally charged. It's like people can have these views, these religious objections to Israel. The question is, do they have the means to act on them? I think what we've seen in the north with Hezbollah, they've really taken, they've taken apart their ability to actually threaten Israel. And like, there's no threat from the Sunnis in Lebanon. There's no reason necessarily there has to be a threat from the Shia in Lebanon. Syria no longer threatens Israel in any real way. So I think the path to peace Israel is take these pieces off the chessboard. And yeah, I mean, the Palestinians are harder to do just because they have this movement, and like their entire focus is on wiping out Israel.
It's their identity.
Yeah, yeah, it's their political. I mean, it's the political. It's the entirety of their politics sort of centers around it, and like it's not just like you have to change Palestinian public opinion. It's like you have to get rid of these people. You have to get rid of the people, and you have to you and like oh somebody will come and take their place. You have to destroy any hope that
Wow.
that's something like what Hamas wants to do, what their ultimate goals are.
I'm glad you're
Israel's.
saying it and not me.
Oh, what?
I'm glad you're saying they,
Oh,
well, it
why
has to
can't
be.
you say it, Zoe? Or do you have
Oh,
Palestinian
God.
sponsors
No,
that are going to cancel you?
it's pretty spicy. I mean, I've heard similar things be said in private, and obviously, 100 years ago, that would just be, and in many other cultures, that would be like obviously the
No, I mean,
solution.
like, look, in every other conflict in the world, like, it's good to get refugees out of war zones. So, like, Sudan has a civil war, and like everyone like doesn't say the Sudanese have to stay there forever, right? Like, nobody should take them, but that's how people feel about the Palestinians. And so, like, I do think that like accepting some of the refugees, it would be better for them. It would be better for them, and it would be better for Israel, and it would be better for the world. It's just people care about that Palestinian cause, and I just don't. You could care about the Palestinian people. The Palestinian cause is not the same thing, and I think that's an idea that I think has been terrible for the world, honestly.
Wow. And your family doesn't feel strongly about it as
Oh, my
Palestinian
family,
Jordanians?
my mom really sort of doesn't like Muslims, and so she's
She
actually
Christian?
yeah, she
Yeah.
sort of likes the Israelis. My dad sort of likes the Palestinians, so yeah,
Did he grow
they
up
just
Muslim?
no. My parents are both Christians.
Both Christians.
Yeah,
Okay.
but a lot of Christian Palestinians were nationalistic. They have been in the past, and some of them still are today. I mean, the Palestinian nationalism, there was a lot of Christian overrepresentation in Arab nationalism too. Um, and yeah, no, I mean, they don't, they they're Americans now. They're into dumb American political stuff.
Hmm.
Political stuff.
Were they born here or born over there?
No, they were born in the Middle East.
Wow, that's cool. And I thought with your last name that you were Jewish, because I know some Jews with that last name, but with the C in front of it.
Yeah, I mean there is a city called Hanania. I think it's Hanania in Israel, and there are Hananias. There was a rabbi called Hanania who fought the Romans, which I learned from Wikipedia. So yeah, it's a name that seems Arab Christians and Jews share.
Mm. Mm. Do you think Trump's going to do good things for the region? Do you think he's going to end the war
Yeah, I
earlier?
think Trump. I mean, I think one unambiguous success of Trump's first term was the Middle East. He made these deals with Israel and these other countries. I mean, he made more deals in a couple of years, and they weren't as big of a deal. Making peace with the UAE is not the same as making a peace with Egypt. Fair enough. But basically, there was a kind of sort of unity between Israel and the Sunni states united against Iran. He comes in, and I think I think that basically what he proved wrong was the idea that you needed the Palestinian issue to be solved the Palestinian issue in order to get peace otherwise in the region. I think history has proved that completely wrong. I mean, I have an article called Trump proved their experts wrong on Israel or the Middle East. I don't always remember my article names, but yeah, there's a quote from John Kerry in there who just says, it's a fantasy. You're not going to be able to solve any, Arab Israeli problem unless you solve the Palestinians. And Jared Kushner came in, who has no expertise in the region. He's just Trump's son-in-law, and he gets these peace deals signed in the Abraham Accords. And so, I think that's right. I think sort of just realizing the Palestinians aren't in the condition to make peace and trying to sort of work around that fact. I think that's the best strategy, and I think that's what they'll probably do in the second administration.
Let's hope so.
You should cut this out. But you're Australian. You have an Australian accent. You sound like a kangaroo. You look like a kangaroo a little bit.
Oh, great.
That's not an insult. That's not an insult. Everyone loves how kangaroos look.
How do I look like a kangaroo? That's the most insane thing I've ever heard.
You sort of, I don't know, you look like a kangaroo. Like a kangaroo is sort of open and curious. And I think that's what everyone likes. And I don't know, they've got a long face and they're open and they're curious.
Thank you so much for joining me, Richard, and hope to see you another time on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Don't you get nervous?
On podcasts? No, not really.
That's good. When do you get nervous?
I don't really get nervous.
Wow. That's such a skill.
I've tried. I have an article on this. I tried to beat that part of me out of my system, and I've managed to sort of freed myself from anxiety. I'm trying to think of the situations where I get nervous. No, very, very rarely.
Flying or anything like that?
No, not flying. No, I used to get nervous when flying. There's if I go on a roller coaster, I'll get nervous.
That's the point of them, right?
Yeah, that's what you want. And then silly things. It's like having to do paperwork, but it's not that kind. It's not kind of nervous, I think, that you're talking about. Talking to somebody or being in front of an audience. No, usually not. I'm pretty calm at this point. Yeah.
That's good.